always thought the universe owed me a good punchline. For years, I had been the one nodding along at other people's messes, handing them tissues, pouring them drinks, clapping at the drama like a polite theater goer. And then she appeared, my personal disaster dressed as temptation. She didn't so much walk into my life as crash through it like a drunk driver through a convenience store. And for once, I didn't call the cops. I called it fate, which already tells you I wasn't thinking straight. She had that kind of grin that looks like it was smuggled through customs, illegal in most time zones, taxed heavily everywhere else. Her laugh was sharp enough to slice glass, and I should know. I once heard it ricochet off a bar counter while she told the bartender to make her drink look like a bad decision in liquid form. I thought finally someone speaking my language, and just like that, I signed up for an unpaid internship in chaos. The first night was supposed to be casual. Casual in the sense that nothing would be remembered in the morning, but she remembered everything. What I ordered, the way I stirred my straw like it was a nervous tick, the fact that I laughed too hard at her cruelest jokes. And she weaponized it. Every detail became ammunition in her game, and I didn't even realize we had started playing. She told me she hated routine, and I believed her. Because within 20 minutes, she'd already broken 3 rules of the bar, smoking inside, dancing on the furniture, and convincing someone to steal the employee's only sign. I should have walked away then. But I was already hooked, the way people get hooked on junk reality TV. You know it's trash, you know it will rot your brain, but you can't look away because deep down, you like the rot. The drinks kept coming. Vodka that burned like new beginnings, tequila that whispered promises it had no intention of keeping, rum that pretended to be friendly but stabbed me in the back with sugar. We were drowning, but it felt like flying. By the 3rd round, I had forgotten my phone, my dignity, and the fact that mornings exist. She leaned close, whispered something indecent, and I thought, this is it. This is the comedy routine my life was missing, the tragic kind. The kind that gets canceled mid-season. People always imagine addiction starting with a needle, a pill, a flame. Mine started with her lipstick on the rim of a glass. Every sip tasted like surrender. Every laugh felt like a dare. Every glance was a shove off the cliff. And I jumped willingly, like a volunteer at a bad magic act. We ended the night sprawled on a stranger's couch, shoes off, head spinning. She asked me if I believed in destiny. I told her I believed in bad choices that look good under neon lights. She laughed, kissed me like punctuation, and fell asleep with her arm draped over me as if possession came free with purchase. I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt chosen. Isn't that the most pathetic part? That I mistook ownership for intimacy and chaos for love. The mornings after were brutal, but I started craving them. The hangover wasn't just physical. It was proof I had lived through her. She'd wake up, stretch like a cat that owned the room, and smirk at me as if to say, "You're still here? Cute." And I stayed. God help me, I stayed. That first week was a carnival ride on repeat. Spilled drinks, strangers' apartments, laughter sharp enough to scar, and promises etched into napkins that dissolved by morning. She told me I was fun, which was a lie I wanted to believe. In reality, I was her audience, her sidekick, her crash test dummy. But when the stage lights hit, I felt like the star. She had rules, of course. Don't get attached. Don't ask questions. Don't expect consistency. And I broke all of them in record time. The first time I texted her twice in a row, she called me cute. The second time, she called me pathetic. Both made my heart race. Do you see the problem? I confused cruelty for attention, and I thought attention was love. We began spending every evening together, which is to say, every evening I let her drag me through the wreckage of her moods. She thrived on drama like some people thrive on caffeine. If the night wasn't messy, it wasn't worth remembering. And I became her accomplice, her co-conspirator, her understudy in self-destruction. It was intoxicating, literally and figuratively. At first, my friends tried to warn me. "She's trouble," they said. "No kidding," I answered. But they didn't understand. Trouble wasn't a warning sign for me. It was an invitation. It meant the story would be good later. And who cares about safety when you're addicted to stories? She had a talent for making pain look glamorous. A fight at 2 a.m. became a performance art piece. An insult became an inside joke. A blackout became a badge of honor. And I laughed right along with her, until my own reflection stopped finding it funny. But by then, I couldn't stop. The laughter was my drug. The chaos was my oxygen. And she was my dealer, handing me fix after fix, always with a smile that said, "You'll come back tomorrow." And she was right. I always came back. I always thought the universe owed me a punchline, so when chaos waltzed in wearing smudged eyeliner and a grin that should have come with a warning label, I mistook the siren for a stand-up set. I was the tired audience, the open bar, the exit sign that never lit up. I told myself I was a critic with taste, but really I was a volunteer for a magic trick where the magician keeps accidentally sawing the same body in half. Mine. The first night felt like a dare wrapped in neon. The room smelled like citrus cleaner pretending to be luxury, and the soundtrack was a bass line calibrated to rearrange my heartbeat. She said routine is for people who fear surprise. I said surprise is just chaos wearing deodorant. We laughed like two fire alarms flirting. The bartender slid glasses that looked like bad decisions in high heels. I drank mine fast to prove I could keep up with my own mistakes. Lipstick marked the rim like a signature on a liability waiver. Hers, not mine, or maybe both. Either way, I co-signed. The air had that charged taste of a night that plans to apologize in the morning, but mornings are notoriously bad at follow-through. We made a game of ignoring consequences, rules, clocks, and the concept of nutritional value. I called it freedom because the word addiction felt rude on a first date. She told a joke about love being a marketing scam, and I laughed too hard, not because it was funny, but because it sounded like permission to misbehave. Permission is the most seductive cologne. We skipped introductions because names imply accountability. And accountability is not sexy. When you're trying to reinvent gravity, she touched my wrist like she was checking my pulse for bravery. I pretended a steady beat. Inside, I was a marching band. Outside, I was a shrug in expensive lighting. We drifted from bar stool to sidewalk like lint in the spin cycle. She said, "Let's go where the floor sticks to your shoes and the lights flatter our delusions." I said, "Lead the way." Every doorway became an altar to denial. Every mirror a courtroom where I defended my right to keep making this mistake. I kept winning on technicalities. We danced without rhythm and called it manifesto. If irony had a choreography, we nailed it. Strangers smiled the way spectators do at slow-motion car wrecks. There, but for the grace of distance, go they. The night unspooled into a montage of shots poured like promises, and promises poured like shots. I stopped checking my phone because messages imply a world that expects you back. I was not planning to return. We carved our initials into the dark with laughter, sharp enough to nick bone. I told myself the sting meant I was alive, as if life requires constant proof of purchase. The first kiss tasted like a dare to abandon the fire exit. So I did, again and again. I remembered that I used to own quiet moments and they used to fit. Now quiet looked like a sweater from last year, tight in the wrong places, itchy where it should be soft. She said I was cute when reckless. I said I was fluent when ridiculous. We toasted to mutual misinterpretation. The glasses clinked like handcuffs with a sense of humor. Sometime between midnight and the version of morning that still counts as night, we ended up on a couch that did not belong to either of us. She fell asleep with the kind of entitlement that suggests previous lives as a crown. I stared at the ceiling fan, slicing the dark into negotiable pieces. I negotiated. I told myself I could leave. I told myself I would leave. I told myself so many times that the words became furniture. Then I rearranged nothing. Sunrise arrived wearing cheap forgiveness. I drank water like confession and failed to repent. The next days became a rerun of a pilot that should have been canceled, but somehow earned a full season order. We built our schedule around the weather inside her mood, mostly storm warnings with brief intervals of fluorescent sunshine that made everything look tacky and irresistible. We texted in fragments like we feared complete sentences might grow roots. She replied when it made me sweat. I replied whenever hope bribed me. The dynamic was a teeter-totter calibrated to reward whoever jumped first. I jumped first, often. Gravity applauded. She had rules that changed like subscription prices. Rule 1, don't get attached. Rule 2, don't ask questions. Rule 3, Don't expect consistency, corollary. Breaking the rules is the only way to prove you're paying attention. I broke them like bread, hungry and pretending it was ritual. My friends tried to help using voices that sounded like smoke alarms with low batteries. I promised to buy new batteries and then hosted another small fire. I wasn't reckless. I was curated recklessness, influencer tier. She loved my sarcasm because it disguised my sincerity. Sincerity is a soft underbelly, and chaos travels with knives. We fought at 2 a.m. We called it theater. We insulted each other and named the insults after constellations so we could navigate back to bed. I laughed at the parts that should have hurt and cried at the parts that should have been funny. Pain is an unreliable narrator. When the lighting is good, I started keeping a journal, 1 line per entry because multiple lines felt like commitment. The first entry read, "This will not be a love story." The second entry read, "This is already a love story." The third entry read, "Please don't let it be a tragedy." The fourth entry forgot how to spell. Please, I perfected the art of arriving just in time to miss my chance to leave. Doors weighed more around her, as if my choices were ankle weights. We collected moments like ticket stubs to a movie we swore we wouldn't watch again. We always watched again. She decorated boredom with danger and sold it back to me at a markup. I paid in optimism, non-refundable. Our jokes grew sharp. They cut on the way out. Laughter became a transfusion, a necessary swap to keep the heart ridiculous. We built rituals by the cheap. Champagne that tastes like ambition. Chase it with something that forgives us. Dance until the floor forgives us. Kiss until the ceiling forgives us. Sleep until morning refuses to. I told myself that wanting consistency made me boring. She told me boredom is the villain in everyone's memoir. I asked who writes the memoir when the protagonist never survives the edit. She kissed me like a headline and changed the subject. On good nights, we talked about art and pretended that wreckage counts as a medium. On bad nights, we performed silence loud enough to wake the neighbors inside our chests. I started measuring time by the distance between panic and punchline. The gap narrowed. The tension raised money for charity and kept none of it. I bought a plant to prove I could nurture. The plant filed a complaint. She said the plant lacked hustle. I agreed even though the leaves looked like a diagnosis. At work, I learned new synonyms for fine. At home, I learned new synonyms for stay. She forgot my favorite song and remembered my weakest hour. I pretended not to notice the arithmetic of that. We tried honesty once and mispronounced it. We tried boundaries and wrote them on napkins because napkins are biodegradable. By morning, our ethics composted into nutrients for the next mistake. When I asked for a quieter night, she said quiet is a scam invented by people who can dance. I said maybe I want to hear myself think. She said thinking is a gateway drug to regret. I said maybe I need a little regret. She laughed and poured another. Mornings got louder. Coffee tasted like negotiations with a landlord who knows you will never move. The mirror started asking better questions. Are you in love with her or with the version of you that looks interesting in her light? I said both. The mirror said choose. I did not. Some afternoons I practiced leaving like a rehearsal. Pack small, breathe big. Step 3, do not explain. Every dress rehearsal ended with encores. The audience inside me demanded spectacle. I obliged. The calendar lost numbers and adopted vibes. My body submitted a maintenance request. My mind auto-replied with vacation photos from an island where I had never been. We kept building a mythology out of poor impulse control. She painted our bad ideas as murals. I posed for them. We called this collaboration. I started wearing shades indoors because the bulbs told the truth too loudly. She called me dramatic. I thanked her for noticing. We scheduled a detox for a Sunday and betrayed it by brunch. Redemption sent a calendar invite, and we declined without reading. When I finally said I need something stable, she asked if I meant boredom again. I said I meant a chair that doesn't collapse under compliments. She said chairs are for spectators. I said I am tired of being the trapeze. She said falling builds character. I asked how much character a human can be expected to build before becoming a cautionary tale. She kissed me like a severance package, and we both signed in invisible ink. I started to count exits in every room. A hobby, a symptom, a blueprint. Each exit looked like a joke I wasn't ready to tell. I learned that denial is a generous host until it hands you the bill. The bill arrived in headaches and hollow laughter, in apologies delivered like coupons, in the way my phone felt heavy with the weight of messages I didn't want to read but couldn't stop refreshing. I told myself one more week, one more encore, one more time telling the story with better lighting. I promised myself I would leave on a high note, then kept adding ladder rungs to a cloud. Some nights I wrote letters to the version of me that believed chaos was a love language. I told her that pretty is not the same as kind, that thrill is not the same as care, that a door can be heavy and still open, that survival is not a bad aesthetic, that laughter can be medicine without being anesthesia. I read the letters in the morning and underlined the parts that didn't flinch. I started drinking water like it contained answers. It didn't, but it helped me choose fewer fake questions. We staged a truce. It required both of us to be better people. We defaulted due to identity theft, mine. I kept giving my better self to nights that couldn't afford her. The final scene of part 1 is not a collapse so much as a pause, a long inhale where the audience wonders if the acrobat will grab the bar or the air. Spoiler, the air does not care, the bar is not guaranteed, the net is a rumor. I'm in the gap, still smirking, still shaking, still translating panic into punchlines. But my hands are starting to memorize the shape of a different choice, and my feet have learned where the exit signs glow even when I pretend not to see them. The curtain hasn't fallen, not yet, but the spotlight is shifting, and for the first time since the beginning I notice the quiet in the wings, waiting, patient, not a scam, not a punishment, a possibility, which is somehow funnier than any of our jokes so far, because if the universe does owe me a punchline, maybe it sounds like this. I walked into chaos looking for a stage and found a door. I'm learning its hinges. They say every circus starts out fun. The lights, the clowns, the popcorn smell that hides the cheap grease paint. But eventually the animals get restless and the cages start to rattle. That's what happened with us. At first, I thought we were trapeze artists, flying, thrilling, defying gravity. By the second act, I realized I was the lion in the cage, and she was the one holding the whip, smiling like it was all part of the show. She became my favorite addiction, and I don't mean that romantically. Romance suggests roses, cards, candlelight. Addiction suggests track marks you can't see and withdrawal that feels like dying. Guess which one we had? Her talent wasn't beauty, though she had that in spades. It was control, subtle at first. Don't wear that. It doesn't look like you. Why do you text so fast? Slow down. People will think you're desperate. Why did you laugh so loud with him? I thought I was the funny one. It slipped in like side comments, and I laughed them off because laughter was our currency. But one day, I checked my bank balance and realized I was bankrupt. Irony became my shield. When she humiliated me in front of friends, I smirked and turned it into a joke. When she forgot my birthday but remembered to criticize my shoes, I shrugged and pretended birthdays were overrated anyway. When she stormed out in the middle of the night, leaving me staring at a door that slammed like a judge's gavel, I whispered plot twist into the empty room. The problem with irony is that it doesn't heal. It numbs, and numb feels safer than raw. The drinking got worse. We used to toast to nothing. Now we drank to silence, to anger, to avoid asking questions that would explode if spoken. Bottles stacked up in corners like evidence of crimes neither of us planned to confess. We called it fun. Our neighbors called it loud. I called it love because I couldn't think of a better word for voluntary suffering. Control shifted into jealousy. If I smiled too long at someone else, she would sulk. If I didn't answer her text in 5 minutes, she'd accuse me of betrayal. If I stayed home, she said I was boring. If I went out without her, she said I was unfaithful. It was a perfect trap. Guilt as wallpaper, blame as furniture, and my heart as the doormat. I walked across myself daily, and yet I stayed, because leaving meant admitting the joke was on me, and my ego hated that punchline. We developed rituals of cruelty. She'd cut me down, I'd laugh it off. She'd disappear, I'd wait by the phone. She'd lie, I'd pretend to believe. Each ritual repeated until it felt like tradition, and tradition is the hardest religion to quit. I tried to fight back sometimes. I told her she was toxic. She smirked and said, toxic is just another word for unforgettable. I told her she made me miserable. She kissed me and said, then you'll never forget me. I told her I wanted to leave. She laughed and said, then why are you still here? And I never had an answer. Friends dropped off one by one. Some were polite, some were blunt, some disappeared quietly. She said they were jealous. I believed her because believing her was easier than being alone. That's how loneliness tricks you. It convinces you that bad company is better than none. She started playing games with my insecurities. Not obvious ones, subtle, sharp. She'd compliment someone else loudly in front of me, then ask why I looked upset. She'd flirt at parties, then accuse me of overreacting. She'd compare me to her exes, always in ways that made me come up short. And I kept laughing, pretending it didn't hurt, because laughter is cheaper than confrontation. The irony was thick enough to choke on. We posted pictures of us smiling, while behind the camera I was crying. We told people we were wild and free, when in reality I was shackled and too exhausted to break the chains. We called it passion. It was prison. The cage got smaller. The rules got stricter. The jokes got meaner. And still, I stayed. Because leaving meant admitting I had been a fool, and fools, unfortunately, prefer fire to shame. By now, even the drinking wasn't enough. I started craving the fights, the explosions, the dramatic exits and dramatic returns. Peace felt foreign, quiet felt unbearable. And so I fed my addiction, her chaos, my pain, our shared destruction, like a pet I couldn't bring myself to kill. One night, after a fight so loud the walls shook, I stared at her across the room and realized something terrifying. I didn't know if I wanted her or just the drama she brought. And maybe, just maybe, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The fights escalated from sport to tradition. At first they were just warm-ups, a prelude before we drowned ourselves in cheap liquor and louder music. But soon the fights became the main event, the headline act in our private circus. She'd start them with a spark, a mocking smile, a too long glance at someone else, a joke that cut a little too deep. I'd bite back with sarcasm, because sarcasm was the only language I could still speak fluently. Then the volume rose, the drinks tipped, and the night spun like a carousel that forgot how to stop. Every time I told myself this would be the last, every time I swore I wouldn't let her drag me back into the tent. But addiction doesn't negotiate with logic. Addiction only bargains with silence, and I hated silence. So I always let her win, because losing felt like company, and company felt like safety, and safety, well, I had forgotten what that looked like. There were good nights, of course, the kind that convince you to stay when you should already be packing. We'd laugh until dawn, bodies curled together on a couch we didn't own, whispering lies that sounded like promises. She'd stroke my hair and say, "We're unstoppable, you and me." And I'd believe her, because I wanted to, because belief was easier than memory, and memory had teeth. But the cracks widened. She started disappearing more often. 2 days gone. 3. No texts, no calls, no explanations. When she finally returned, she smelled of perfume that wasn't mine and stories that didn't belong to me. I asked where she'd been. She laughed. "Don't be so clingy," she said, as if my question were a comedy routine. I laughed too, because that's what I did, turned pain into punchlines. But my laugh was hollow, and I think she knew it. Jealousy became her favorite toy. If I so much as smiled at a stranger, she'd punish me with silence, withholding affection like it was rent money I hadn't paid. If I stayed quiet, she accused me of plotting betrayal. It was a trap without exits. Damned if I spoke, damned if I didn't. And the damning was always mine. I learned to tiptoe, to measure my words, to smile only when she was watching, to laugh only at her jokes. And in doing so, I became smaller, not physically, though even my body started to feel like it was shrinking under the weight of her moods. Smaller inside, like a shadow of myself tethered to her fire, burning whenever she snapped her fingers. The irony? I thought this was love. I thought the burning meant devotion. I thought the bruises on my pride were badges of loyalty. I thought my suffering was proof that I was alive, when in reality, I was dying, slowly, sarcastically, one joke at a time. The drinking turned into blackout therapy. It wasn't about fun anymore. It was about survival. Each glass dulled the edges of her cruelty, made her laughter less sharp, her accusations less cutting. But the dulling came with a price. Mornings full of nausea, afternoons full of shame, and nights that blurred into each other like cheap paint running in the rain. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself. Bloodshot eyes, trembling hands, a face that smiled only when rehearsing. And behind it all, a voice that whispered, "You're losing." But I couldn't leave. Leaving meant admitting failure. Leaving meant the joke wasn't clever, it was cruel, and I couldn't bear to be the punchline of my own life. One night, she humiliated me in front of everyone. We were at a party, her stage, my prison. She told a story about me, twisting the details until I became the fool, the needy one, the weak one. People laughed. Even I laughed. But when I excused myself to the bathroom, I locked the door and stared at my reflection until tears blurred the edges. I whispered, "This isn't love." And then I whispered, "But it's all I have." And that was worse. Friends stopped inviting me out. They were tired of watching me self-destruct. Some told me directly, "She's toxic, she's ruining you." I defended her like a lawyer paid in false hope. "You don't know her like I do. She's not always like this. We're just passionate." I said the lines like a script I no longer believed. But belief wasn't the point. Survival was. Soon the cage closed tighter. She checked my phone, my messages, my clothes. She asked where I was, who I was with, why I was late, why I was early. Every answer was wrong. Every silence was suspicious. Every breath was evidence. And still, I stayed. Because here's the truth. The cage wasn't locked. I could have left any time. But she convinced me the world outside was worse, that no one else would love me, that I wasn't strong enough to stand alone. And I believed her because belief was easier than bravery. The circus became a cage. The cage became a home, and the home became a grave. I was burying myself alive, one ironic laugh at a time. But even graves have cracks, and through those cracks, sometimes, light leaks in. I began to see flashes, moments when I remembered who I used to be, what I used to want, how I used to breathe. They were fleeting, like headlights on a dark road, gone as soon as they arrived. But they reminded me that there was something beyond the tent, beyond the cage, beyond the circus. Something that might even be worth surviving for. The thought terrified me more than staying, because survival meant change, and change meant admitting I had been wrong, and admitting I had been wrong felt like death. But maybe, just maybe, it was the only kind of death that could save me. I used to call it romance, then rebellion, then a phase. Now I call it dosage. I wake up counting units of chaos like pills in a plastic tray, morning, noon, night, as needed, repeat until identity dissolves. The bottle is a calendar with the days scratched off. Her laugh is the pharmacist that never asks for a prescription. I am the patient who insists the side effects prove it is working. The ritual begins before sunrise. I check my pulse to see if it is hers. If the beat is steady, I panic because steadiness feels like sickness. If it skips, I relax because skipping means she is near. My coffee tastes like an apology she never gives. I drink it black the way she likes her jokes, cruel and efficient. I stare at the door as if it is a vein. I want it to open and hurt me. I need the sting of her entrance to confirm I am still real. This is how dependence teaches math. One absence equals 1,000 needles. One message equals an ocean of relief. Relief is a liar dressed as a paramedic. I used to say I could quit whenever I wanted. Now I say I will quit when the timing makes sense. Timing never makes sense because she is the clock and I am the minute hand strapped to a firework. Explosions on the hour, ashes on the half. My phone is a slot machine. I pull to refresh and pray for cherries. Some mornings I win 3 dots typing and call it love. Some nights I lose the whole paycheck of my self-respect and call it fate. Luck is an accomplice with good hair. I pretend to function. I work. I answer questions with answers that resemble answers. I nod in meetings and keep my hands under the table so nobody sees them shake. I count breaths like inventory. I am a warehouse of almost empty boxes. Silence arrives at 2 p.m., like withdrawal in a business suit. It asks polite questions. Why haven't you eaten? Why are your eyes glass? Why is the floor moving? I tell silence that I am saving room for tonight. Tonight is my religion. Worship begins at sundown. I promise myself I will not text first. I last 8 minutes. I call that progress. Progress replies with a thumbs up emoji and a restraining order. She replies with nothing for an hour. Then one word, out. I sprint as if oxygen is limited. I leave the quiet bleeding on the couch. The bar is an altar. The stool is confession. The bartender is a priest with worse boundaries. I order salvation on ice. She appears. She always appears when I am already kneeling. She smiles like a relapse. I exhale like a bargain. We touch and the room narrows to a straw. I drink us until my throat forgets how to be dry. We trade quips like syringes, clean enough to deny, dirty enough to work. She asks how I am. I say calibrated. She laughs and says I am funny when broken. I crack wider so the light can laugh too. Pain is a great audience. We perform the choreography, only we know. Insult, shrug, sip, smirk, kiss, flinch, repeat. It is a dance card with blood type listed as preference. I dip when she raises her voice. I twirl when she turns away. I split when she says stay. I do not ask where she was last night. Questions are hangovers. I do not want morning to arrive early. She does not ask why my hands tremble. Answers are indictments. We prefer charming crimes. She feeds me little storms. Jealousy like a gummy bear. Control like a vitamin. Threats like a multicolored pack of candy that stains the tongue. I swallow and show her my mouth to prove I am faithful. She checks my pockets for sobriety. I fail on purpose. We leave together because leaving separately would imply options. Options are contraband. The sidewalk is a treadmill set to escape. We do not escape. We take photos that make danger look like fireworks. Filters forgive anything. Back at the apartment, the furniture judges me. The lamp says I used to read. The couch says I used to sleep. The mirror says I used to know my own face. She silences them with a glance. Command performance. The audience of one claps with shaking hands. I promise I will drink water between drinks. I forget. I promise I will stop at 2. I forget. I promise I will stop promising. I remember that part. The fight begins on schedule. It is a dosage increase. My body anticipates the spike and prepares the sermon. I say I love her in a tone that sounds like I surrender. She says, prove it, and hands me a match. I burn the boundary I drew at noon. The smoke alarms applaud. She says I looked at someone else. I say I looked at a clock. She says time is betrayal. I say I am guilty of minutes. She sentences me to hours. I accept without appeal. We escalate for sport. Words become shrapnel. Memory becomes kindling. History becomes a weaponized museum we tour for free. She narrates my failures with impeccable diction. I correct the timeline and apologize for existing. Facts are less persuasive than hunger. I laugh at the worst moment because my nervous system is a comedian with bad timing. She calls me heartless. I try to show her my pulse, but it is hiding under the table with my dignity. We find nothing and pretend it is enough. Pretending is an anesthetic with a high success rate. If she leaves mid-fight, I follow like a siren in sneakers. I chase her shadow down hallways that bend into mirrors. I apologize to the reflection. It accepts and asks for identification. I cannot provide any. The night runs out of furniture to throw. We share the last drink like a secret we will never keep. She says she hates me. I say that is a shape of love. She laughs because I am a poet when desperate. I become more desperate to keep the poem. She sleeps. I watch the ceiling swim. I whisper to the dark that I am handling it. The dark files a complaint. I sign with shaking letters. The signature looks like a seismograph. Morning is a courtroom. The sun is a judge who cannot be bribed. I stand and plead exhaustion. The sentence is consciousness. I serve it in full. Work calls. I answer with a professional imitation of a person. I meet deadlines by stapling adrenaline to the pages. I send emails that apologize for everything except the right things. I avoid windows because they show exits. I avoid water because it reflects faces. I avoid mirrors because they speak fluent disappointment. Friends text, "Are you okay?" And I reply, of course, with 12 exclamation points. They ask if I need anything, and I say I need this to make sense. They fall silent because sense is out of stock. I consider shoplifting sanity. The cameras are everywhere, so is she. I try to quit on a Tuesday because Tuesdays look reasonable. I write a plan with bullet points that do not explode. I delete her number and memorize it 2 minutes later. I throw away the bottles and keep the caps. The caps whisper souvenirs. I keep everything that hurts because I call it history. History keeps me. By noon, I am sweating logic. By 4, I am shaking charm. By 6, I am bargaining with furniture. By 8, I am at the bar again, all resolve dissolved, a sugar cube in a flood. She arrives like absolution dressed for a crime. I say I tried. She says trying is cute. I say I want to live. She says living is optional when you look this good. We toast to survival and call it romance. The liquid laughs up my throat. The laughter tastes like defeat with sprinkles. I swallow and ask for seconds. Second chances are our house special. We serve them until the cupboards are bare. My body begins to invoice me. Headaches arrive with itemized charges. Sleep demands back pay. Hands submit receipts for tremors. Heart requests hazard pay and a union. I offer sarcasm and a coupon for hope. They accept because they have seen me worse. She notices the decline and smiles. Dependence looks good on you. It makes you soft. Soft is easier to shape. I laugh because the truth is a wrecking ball and I prefer papier-mâché. We paste a future to the wall. Rain seeps through and the paper curls. I sell pieces of normal to fund the habit. I skip meals to afford nights. I skip birthdays to afford apologies. I skip therapy because sobriety is a mirror and I am allergic to reflection. Allergies itch at 3 a.m. I scratch until the skin of my excuses bleeds. On a rare afternoon of clarity, I list losses like inventory after a storm. Friends who stopped calling, jobs I nearly lost, books I stopped reading, songs I can no longer hear without tasting bile, boundaries I burned for warmth, the warmth that never stayed. I write etc. and underline it twice. I write my name and cannot remember the spelling. She texts, "Where are you?" and I teleport. I am Pavlov's final experiment. The bell rings and the dog builds the laboratory. I arrive panting with my leash already clipped. She asks nothing, and I offer everything. Everything grows cheaper each night. We try being kind for 5 minutes and break out in hives. Kindness feels like a suit that does not fit our choreography. We change back into damage and sigh with relief. Damage stretches. Damage breathes. Damage knows all our steps by heart. She tells me I am dramatic. I tell her she is a museum of alarms. She says I am lucky she loves me. I say I am lucky in the way planes are lucky when they land on water. We argue about who is the bigger miracle. We drown politely. Sleep becomes a rumor. The hours between 2 and 4 begin to gossip. They say she is with someone else. They say I am the understudy for a role I was never cast in. They say the joke has gone stale. I tell the hours to mind their business. They say my business is foreclosure. I learn to cry without witnesses. I learn to laugh without jokes. I learn to apologize without crimes. I learn to crave the slap of chaos more than the touch of tenderness. Tenderness is a language I forgot in a move. The boxes were mislabeled. I keep opening rage and calling it home. My body finally rebels. It shuts down grace. It shuts down appetite. It shuts down poise. It keeps only the hunger for her and the thirst for forgetting. Healthcare sends pamphlets. I use them as coasters under bottles labeled later. On the worst night, the room tilts like a ship and the floor barks orders. Find a bed, find a pulse, find air that is not borrowed. I obey poorly. She watches with a look that says, "This is what devotion looks like." I nod because I am past language. We call an ambulance and hang up before it rings. We do not like witnesses. I promise the universe 1 clean week. The universe promises a clean hour. We both fail and keep negotiating. I sign another contract with my shaking hand and spill on the signature. Ink crawls like ants. I let them carry my name away. I wake to a voice that sounds like mine. It says, "You are not going to survive this if you keep calling it love." I say survival is a strong word. It says, "So is dead." We stare at each other from opposite sides of the mirror. One of us blinks. I do not know which. She arrives with breakfast in a bag that smells like forgiveness. Forgiveness is lukewarm. We eat it anyway. She asks me to be normal today. I try it on and the sleeves rip. She sighs and orders chaos in my size. Tailored, expedited shipping, signature required. We take a walk past all the doors I could have used. Every handle remembers my palm. Every hinge whispers my name like a memory test. I fail with flair. I pass with hunger. She squeezes my hand and says, "This is love." The word fits like a harness. I trot on cue. At night we sit on the floor because chairs imply stability. We trade confessions we will weaponize later. I tell her I dream of quiet. She laughs and calls it a horror film. I laugh too because laughter pays the rent. Rent is due daily. I stop pretending I am not addicted. I start pretending addiction is glamorous. Glamour is a blackout with better lighting. I curate my collapse for an audience of one. She claps when I shake. I bow because performance is the only thing I still do well. People ask what happened to me. I say I fell in love and forgot the map out. They say maps are free. I say not at this store. They say try another store. I say this store is the only one open late. They stop asking. The late hours nod in mutual respect. I build an altar to relapse and decorate it with ticket stubs and unkept promises. I light a candle that smells like last year's bravado. I pray to spiral responsibly. The prayer returns unopened. Return to sender. Sender unknown. My future shrinks to the radius of her reach. If she is near, the horizon expands to a city of neon. If she is far, the horizon is a motel hallway that never ends. Either way, the carpet is stained with my best intentions. I stop packing them. They never travel well. I do not rescue myself tonight. I do not invent a sunrise that forgives us. I do not perform a detox montage with inspirational music and better shoes. I stay. I stay because staying is the only verb my mouth can pronounce without slurring. I stay because the cage is warm. I stay because the keeper knows my favorite brand of chain. I stay because addiction is gravity and I have lost my moon boots. When she asks what I want, I say more. When she asks what hurts, I say not enough. When she asks who I am, I say yours. Ownership is a lullaby. I sleep in its teeth. If there is a moral, it is paid by the hour. If there is a rescue, it is stuck in traffic. If there is a God, she smells like disinfectant and schedules Tuesdays. I miss my appointment. I reschedule for never. Never arrives on time. The punchline is simple. I chased a joke until it became a needle. I loved a needle until it became a cage. I named the cage home and asked it to tuck me in. It did. It does. It will. And if you ask me tomorrow whether I want out, I will smile like a professional patient and say not yet. Because the first laugh of the night still feels like air. Because the first drink of the evening still tastes like reprieve. Because the first look from her still detonates the boring parts of my fear. Because the collapse has choreography and I am a dancer with perfect attendance. Because dependence is a language and I am finally fluent. Because recovery would be a dialect with too much silence and not enough applause. Because I am honest enough to admit that honesty is not on tonight's menu. So I raise my glass to the wreckage and I toast like a champion, to dosage, to devotion, to the beautiful baited hook, to staying because leaving would make sense and I am allergic to sense, to the cage that knows my weight by heart, to the keeper who calls me soft and means sculpture, to the joke that turned into a system, to the system that turned into me. And when the room tilts and the laughter smears and the night begins its slow surgery, I will whisper the only prayer I still remember. Do not let it stop. Do not let it stop. Do not let it stop.